Hello everyone, welcome to my channel Bold and Beautiful today. When Liam woke up, he uttered 6 words to Bill that caused him to cry in sorrow. Liam's arrival broke the lavish silence of the Spencer Publications pentoffice, which is typically a reflection of Bill Spencer Jr.'s control over his universe. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, dawn poured scarlet and gold over Los Angeles, creating long, accusing shadows that appeared to cling to Liam's tired body. Bill looked up, a glimmer of irritation swiftly covered by paternal condescension. He was already comfortably seated behind his obsidian desk, exuding his usual aura of invincibility, with his white shirt open at the collar, a heavy watch glinting in the light, and the smell of pricey coffee and power hanging in the air. "Liam. Early for you. Coffee?" he said in a silky voice that was a well-honed combination of authoritative and informal control, as if he thought he had a solid grip on every lever of consequence. Liam did not approach the chair that was offered. He was pallid, with shadows carving deep hollows beneath eyes that lacked their typical hesitating warmth and instead had a cold, tired clarity as he paused just inside the threshold. In that moment, he appeared less like Bill's kid and more like a ghost sent to render a decision. He was the corporeal representation of every ignored warning and every collateral damage bill that Spencer's brutality had ever accrued. Bill's love always appeared conditional, subordinate to strategy and dominance, and the air crackled with years of whispered secrets, betrayals, and the unrelenting quest for triumph at all costs. Bill shifted, his confidence pricked by a tiny uneasiness. He wasn't navigating the agitated, conflicted Liam he was used to. This was something that had been created in a furnace of deep disillusionment, something colder and tougher. Liam moved ahead one step at a time. When it did come, his voice was not a roar, not even a venomous whisper. It bore the weight of a lifetime of broken dreams and inherited suffering. It was flat, without inflection, a straightforward, crushing declaration of absolute, irrevocable truth. 6 carefully selected words, devoid of any drama, land with the finality of a gravestone locking its lid. "You're why I can't be happy." The ensuing quiet was more than just the absence of sound, it was a vacuum that drained the room of the oxygen, the self-assurance, and the entire basis of Bill Spencer Jr.'s painstakingly created reality. Unquestionably, the 6 words sat there, stark. They weren't an angry allegation or a self-pitying appeal. A lifetime of paternal influence was reflected in the clinical diagnosis and verdict. The truth was the twist, the simplicity was the knife. Seconds before, Bill's face, which had been a mask of polished arrogance, changed dramatically. The patronizing half-smile paused, then broke. His eyes, which are either piercing with determination or blazing with passion, subtly enlarged, the pupils expanding as though they were taking a physical hit. A casual hand on his desk twitched, its fingers curling inward and its nails lightly brushing the polished obsidian. His internal collapse was evident mainly in the abrupt loss of color in his face and the little tremble that endangered the hard line of his jaw, rather than a spectacular wince. He looked at Liam as a mirror, held up with harsh, uncompromising clarity, rather than as his son. He saw each brutal takeover as lessons in domination that Liam had learned and then rejected, rather than as victories. In each instance, he had used Liam, Wyatt, Hope, or Steffi as pawns on his own chessboard. Every scathing comment passed off as hard truth, every rejection of Liam's softer side as weakness, and every time Bill's personal ambitions, grudges, and unquenchable thirst for victory brutally upended the tenuous harmony Liam was trying to establish. The words reverberated with terrifying specificity, the ongoing instability in Liam's romantic life, tainted by Bill's meddling and the poisonous legacy of Spencer's cunning, the underlying fear and uncertainty Liam struggled with, stemming from his inability to determine whether love or loyalty was real or just another of his father's tricks, and the basic mistrust of happiness itself, since in Bill's world, happiness was a sign that you weren't working hard enough or paying enough attention. With terrifying clarity, Bill realized how his own unrelenting ambition, his refusal to accept tranquility, and his insistence on seeing every relationship as a battleground had permeated Liam's spirit and become the impassable obstacle separating his son from the straightforward, secure happiness Liam more desperately desired than any Spencer wealth. It was a single, treacherous tear that broke the dam, not a sob. Despite a lifetime of strict control and the unwavering Spencer teaching that tears were only for the weak and beaten, it welled in the corner of Bill's eye. It carved a way through the facade of invincibility, moving slowly and glisteningly down his cheek. Another came after it. And yet another. He didn't collapse. Instead, he sat motionless, but the tears came slowly and quietly, a visceral outpouring of regret so deep it escaped conscious awareness. This was the raw, involuntary ejection of a soul facing the irreparable harm it had caused. It wasn't a call for pity or impact. He viewed Liam as the terrible end result rather than the issue. He saw the young child who had admired him and whose confidence he had steadily undermined. He witnessed the young man being continuously torn apart by allegiances that Bill had turned into a weapon. Now, he saw the exhausted adult standing in front of him, naked, and claiming that the primary poison in his life came straight from the man he had once looked up to, his own father. In the face of this complete personal failure, the opulent office and the representations of his enormous wealth and power, the desk, the view, and the artwork, became hideous, pointless props. Empires were founded on shattered suns, but what good were they? When the pleasure of the only legacy that really mattered was sacrificed for triumph, what good was it? His remorse extended beyond particular acts. It encompassed the entire worldview he had lived by, the toxic masculinity he had cloaked himself in, and the conviction that conquest came before love. He lamented every chance he had lost for real connection, every time he had opted for control over empathy, and every lesson in brutality he had unintentionally imparted. Liam's statement felt unquestionably, heartbreakingly true, and he regretted that. The tears were the outward expression of the heartbreaking insight that his life's labor in the most important area had failed miserably. In addition to creating financial dynasties, he destroyed his son's opportunity for emotional serenity. Although he was in charge of boardrooms, he was no longer in charge of his own legacy. He was the one responsible for Liam's discontent. He could no longer spin, twist, or buy his way out of the reality. It was a crushing weight. It just was, as definitive and indisputable as Liam's heartbreaking, flat sentence. Liam observed the tears streaming down. His eyes had no sparkle of vindictiveness, no look of satisfaction. Only a deep, bone-deep melancholy, a mirror of the barren terrain his father's actions had carved out for him. He had come to declare a fact, to finally speak out against the unseen cord that had held him back for so long, not to injure. It was tragic in its own right to witness Bill, the Titan, brought low by the unadulterated truth spoken by his own son, not by an adversary or a market meltdown. Beneath the Spencer armor, buried for decades by ambition and hubris, he saw the glimmer of the guy capable of such depth of feeling. It was terrible and scary all at once. The echoes of those 6 sentences and the soft patter of Bill's tears on his desk's shiny surface filled the long pause. Once a sign of the possible victories of a new day, the sunlight now seemed to be a ruthless spotlight on their mutual destruction. Liam was not consoling. He remained still. He just stood there, a silent observer to the collapse he had set in motion, the collapse Bill had built throughout his life with his own decisions. The only weapon strong enough to break through Bill Spencer's impenetrable facade was his truth, which he had delivered. And it had a profound effect. Other than the quiet, catching breaths that periodically escaped his stiff stance, Bill made no sound. He continued to stare at a spot in the middle distance, not the glistening skyline of Los Angeles, but the ruins of his connection with his kid, the undeniable proof of his greatest failure. "You're why I can't be happy." The words reverberated in the penthouse opulent tomb, a 6-word epitaph for the relationship and a condemnation that would reverberate within Bill Spencer Jr. long after the tears dried. The tears continued, washing away not only the brutal mogul's facade but also the devastated father underneath, drowning in an ocean of regret he could never navigate, a regret born from the devastatingly simple, irrevocable truth, "You're why I can't be happy." He had lost everything that mattered, and for once the game was really over. Bill's new physician gives him positive news on Liam's health. "Don't worry, I can save your son." The sterile, unforgiving air of the pediatric intensive care unit hung heavy around Bill, a tangible weight pressing down on his shoulders, seeping into his bones, a chilling counterpoint to the frantic, artificial warmth generated by the humming machines keeping his son, Liam, tethered precariously to life. Weeks had bled into a blur of agonizing uncertainty, each sunrise a grim reminder of time slipping away, each sunset a deepening trench of despair carved into Bill's soul. Liam, his vibrant 8-year-old, the boy who raced dinosaurs across the living room rug and laughed with the abandon of pure sunshine, lay unnaturally still amidst a nest of wires and tubes, his small frame dwarfed by the high-tech bed, his skin waxy and pale, almost translucent under the relentless glare of the overhead lights. The diagnosis, elusive and cruel, had become a spectral tormentor, shifting names and prognosis with each specialist consultation, rare autoimmune disorders, baffling neurological syndromes, grim possibilities whispered in hushed tones that offered only terrifying dead ends and dwindling options. Bill had watched hope, once a sturdy oak within him, splinter and crack under the relentless battering of negative tests, inconclusive scans, and treatments that either failed spectacularly or offered cruel, fleeting respites before Liam plunged back into the terrifying abyss of his illness. He'd mortgaged their future, sold anything not bolted down, haunted online forums disappearing down rabbit holes of desperation, his world shrinking to the four walls of this picker room, the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor a metronome counting down a horror he couldn't face. Exhaustion wasn't just physical, it was a marrow-deep weariness, a soul-crushing fatigue that made even breathing feel like labor. He'd seen the subtle shifts in the nurse's eyes, the carefully neutral expressions of the previous doctors, the unspoken verdict hanging thick in the air, terminal, untreatable, prepare. He'd begun the impossible internal work of steeling himself, building walls against the coming cataclysm, rehearsing words he could never say, while simultaneously praying for a miracle he no longer truly believed could come. His hand, resting on the cool metal rail of Liam's bed, trembled slightly, a physical manifestation of the internal earthquake threatening to consume him. Then, a new presence entered the charged atmosphere, Dr. Anya Thorne, the highly recommended specialist they'd been waiting for, transferred urgently from her research hospital halfway across the country. She moved with a quiet, focused energy that cut through the pervasive lethargy of despair. Unlike the previous consultants who often seemed burdened by the case's complexity, Dr. Thorne radiated an intense, almost unsettling concentration. Her eyes, a startlingly clear gray, scanned the monitors, the charts, Liam's still form, not with detached clinical curiosity, but with the sharp, probing gaze of a detective meticulously re-examining a cold case, searching for the overlooked clue. She spent an hour with Liam, her examination thorough, gentle, yet profoundly detailed, asking Bill specific, pointed questions about symptoms he'd recounted a dozen times before, but now framed in a subtly different context. The exact pattern of the fever spikes, the precise nature of the muscle weakness before paralysis set in, the specific timing of the neurological episodes relative to medication. She requested reams of old data, cross-referencing blood work from months ago with recent scans, her fingers flying over a tablet, pulling up research papers and obscure case studies Bill had never heard mentioned. Bill watched her, a flicker of something unfamiliar, not quite hope, but perhaps the ghost of its possibility, stirring amidst the ashes of his resignation. This wasn't the weary shuffle of defeat, this was the focused hum of active engagement. She conferred quietly with the resident, pointing at waveforms on the EEG readout, tracing lines on a genetic sequencing report Bill barely understood, her voice low but resonant with conviction. Finally, she turned to Bill, her expression grave but devoid of the crushing finality he'd become accustomed to. She gestured towards the small, stark family room adjacent to Liam's cubicle. "Mr. Henderson, may we have a little private talk? Since I got here, I've been going over Liam's case in great depth and comparing it to some very recent, quite focused study." Bill followed her, his legs feeling like lead weights, the familiar icy dread coiling in his stomach. This is it, he thought, the walls he'd built seeming suddenly flimsy, insubstantial. The final confirmation. The words that will shatter the world. The family room felt cramped, the worn upholstery of the chairs, the faint smell of stale coffee, the generic landscape print on the wall, all seemed imbued with a terrible finality. Dr. Thorne sat opposite him, leaning forward slightly, her hands clasped, her gaze locking onto his with an intensity that demanded his full, terrified attention. She didn't mince words, but her delivery wasn't cold, it was direct, layered with a profound understanding of the precipice they stood upon. Henderson, I am aware that the path you and Liam have taken has been tremendously challenging. The uncertainty, the failed treatments, the sheer weight of watching your child suffer, it's beyond what any parent should endure. Bill was unable to do more than nod, with a fist-sized lump in his throat and white knuckles where he gripped the chair's arms. She went on, her voice steady, I think the previous diagnostic paths explored were valid based on the presenting symptoms, but I believe they missed a critical nuance, a very rare presentation of an even rarer condition, a specific mutation affecting mitochondrial function, intertwined with an atypical autoimmune cascade, essentially mimicking several more common, untreatable disorders. It is known as Variant 7 of Andersen-Kierkegaard syndrome. There are only a few known cases in the world, and the diagnostic indicators are very subtle and are frequently obscured by the side effects. Bill's mind whirled, another name, another complicated jumble of syllables that meant, what? More pain, more dead ends? He braced himself, the familiar numbness spreading, but then Dr. Thorne leaned closer, her gray eyes blazing with a fierce, unwavering light that seemed to pierce through the mist of his despair. Her voice, still composed, lowered slightly, filled with a resonant certainty that reverberated in the tiny room. But here's what you need to understand, Mr. Henderson, she said, her words deliberate, landing with the weight of a lifeline thrown into a stormy sea. The words hung in the air, suspended, monumental. For a heartbeat, maybe two, Bill simply stopped breathing. The relentless beeping from Liam's room, the distant Pennsylvania announcement, the hum of the HVAC, all sounds ceased to exist. Those 9 words, spoken with such absolute, unshakable conviction, slammed into the fortress of his despair like a battering ram forged from pure light. Don't worry. I can save your son. They weren't a vague promise, a hopeful maybe, they were a declaration. A seismic shift in the very bedrock of his reality. The icy dread that had been his constant companion didn't just thaw, it shattered, exploding into a million glittering shards, replaced by a surge of pure, disorienting adrenaline that left him momentarily dizzy, lightheaded. His vision blurred, not with tears of sorrow, but with the sudden, overwhelming pressure of a hope so profound, so unexpected, it felt almost violent. He stared at Dr. Thorne, searching her face for any hint of doubt, any trace of professional hedging. He found none. Only that fierce, intelligent certainty, the calm of deep knowledge and a meticulously formed plan. A choked sound escaped him, part gasp, part sob, wholly involuntary. His hands, still gripping the chair, began to tremble violently, not with fear now, but with the sheer, overwhelming force of released tension, a dam bursting after holding back an ocean of grief. Save him? He rasped, the words scraping raw from his throat, barely audible. You. Can you save him? How? What? Desperate for the fulcrum of her certainty, the questions rolled out, broken. With a quick, determined motion, Dr. Thorne nodded. Yes. Preserve him. Despite being extremely rare, this variety, AKS7, reacts exceptionally well to a very precise, tailored treatment. The treatment is a combination of a newly FDA-approved novel monoclonal antibody for compassionate use for extremely rare mitochondrial disorders that targets the specific autoimmune component that is crippling his cells and a carefully calibrated metabolic cocktail that circumvents the damaged mitochondrial pathway and directly supports cellular energy production. Think of it as a two-pronged attack, preventing the immune system from destroying his cells' power plants, and then offering a substitute fuel source while the damage is being repaired. She displayed intricate graphs and molecular structures on her tablet, but her explanation was remarkably straightforward. The research is state-of-the-art, published just 6 months ago by a team I collaborate with. Within weeks of starting treatment, we observed nearly total symptom reversal in the 3 other patients that were identified. It was confirmed late last night by Liam's genetic sequencing, which I reran using a particular panel searching for this precise mutant cluster. Everything about him, his presentation, the particular sequence of neurological involvement followed by respiratory failure, the distinct changes in biomarkers, aligns flawlessly. Because they weren't focused enough, earlier immunosuppressants only partially functioned or had harsher adverse effects. This antibody is like a laser-guided missile for the specific rogue immune cells causing havoc. She quickly and precisely laid out the plan, which included administering the first dose of the antibody via 4 right away, starting the metabolic support formulas at the same time, closely monitoring for any cytokine release reaction for the first 48 hours, which was manageable, and carefully weaning off the ventilator as his neuromuscular function improved. So, Mr. Henderson, we start now. Damage increases with each hour of delay, but the cellular machinery is ready to react. The window is here. We have the remedy. Liam will come back from this. The sheer, unvarnished confidence in her voice, the intricate detail of her plan, the concrete nature of the treatment, it wasn't a nebulous hope, it was a roadmap out of hell, drawn by someone who knew the territory intimately. Bill felt the tears finally spill over, hot and unchecked, tracing paths down cheeks that had been set in lines of grim endurance for too long. They weren't tears of sadness, but of a profound, almost unbearable release, a catharsis born from the sudden, staggering removal of an impossible weight. Save your son. The words echoed in his mind, no longer just sound, but a tangible force, a lifeline he could grasp. He looked towards Liam's room, seeing not just the frail child, but the boy who would race dinosaurs again, whose laughter would once more fill their home. Dr. Thorne's hand briefly covered his own on the chair arm, a gesture of fierce solidarity. Breathe, Mr. Henderson. Simply take a breath. Now the battle is different. We're bringing Liam home. And for the first time in months, Bill Henderson dared to believe in the sunrise in that sterile little room, amid the lingering smell of antiseptic and despair. The doctor hadn't just delivered good news, she had completely changed his life with 9 straightforward, devastating words.